The first thing Trisha Lane noticed was not the wall. It was the road. Miles of broken highway, abandoned cars, sun-bleached billboards, wind dragging trash through the lanes, and not a single zombie on it. That was wrong. By then, Trisha knew the shape of wrong better than she knew her own reflection. Wrong was an unlatched cellar door. Wrong was a barking dog in an empty neighborhood. Wrong was finding food still warm on a stove and no one left alive to eat it. But this was cleaner than wrong. This felt arranged. The convoy slowed at the top of the hill. Below them, in the center of a dead industrial basin, the city of Halcyon sat behind the pale concrete walls and working floodlights, like the world had ended everywhere else by mistake. Watchtowers stood at careful intervals. Solar panels glinted on rooftops. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, controlled ribbons. Inside the walls, laundry moved on a line. A child crossed a courtyard on a bicycle. Someone in the school bus behind Trisha started crying before the vehicle even stopped. Not loud crying, the kind that escapes by accident when hope comes back too quickly and the body doesn't know where to put it. Owen, the convoy's driver, leaned over the wheel and stared downhill through the cracked windshield. "Tell me you don't see that." "I see it." "No," he said. "I mean, tell me it's not real." Trisha didn't answer. 32 people had reached the hill with them. 32 survivors spread across one battered bus, 2 pickups, and the old utility truck Trisha had been riding in for the last 6 days. 32 people who had buried too many others on the way. Nobody got out. Nobody opened a door. They just sat there looking at the city and trying not to trust it. And then the gates opened. Cleanly, smoothly. No grinding chain, no desperate salvage noise, no rusted groan. The gates opened like they'd been opened yesterday. A line of armed guards stepped out wearing matching jackets with the same symbol sewn onto each shoulder. A black tower inside a white circle. No name, no slogan, just the tower. One of the guards lifted a megaphone. "Welcome to Halcyon," he called. His voice carried all the way up the hill. "You are safe now." That line moved through the convoy like heat through frozen hands. Trisha felt people behind her shifting, breaking, coming apart with relief. A man in the pickup behind them started laughing. Someone in the bus whispered, "Oh my God." Owen looked at her. "What do you think?" Trisha kept her eyes on the open gates, on the guard line, on the empty road leading down. "No place says that out loud," she murmured. "What?" "You're safe now." She swallowed. Places that are safe don't have to say it. But the convoy was already moving. There are moments in the end of the world when suspicion loses to exhaustion. This was one of them. They rolled downhill past the first barrier, past concrete planters full of herbs, past a checkpoint built from welded steel and disciplined habit. The gates closed behind them with a soft final thud that should have sounded comforting. To Trisha, it sounded like a lid settling onto a box. Halcyon was not a miracle. That made it worse. If it had looked magical, impossible, untouched, Trisha would have distrusted it immediately. Instead, it looked functional, lived in, earned. There were rooftop gardens and collection barrels and patched facades and reinforced stairwells. A school gym had been turned into intake housing. The old pharmacy now served as a clinic. The church doubled as a council chamber. A dry fountain had become a vegetable bed. Power came on in blocks, 6 hours at a time, and everyone moved around it like blood around a heartbeat. The city wasn't pristine. It was organized. That was far more convincing, and far more dangerous. Intake happened in the school gym. Cots covered most of the polished floor. Folding tables had been arranged in stations with handwritten signs. Check-in, medical, assignments, new arrivals. There were already dozens of people there. Families, stragglers, singles, entire little knots of survivors from other roads, other states, other wrecked maps. So the rumors had been true. Word about Halcyon had spread. People had been coming here for a while. The woman at intake was efficient, calm, and so practiced she barely needed to look down as she asked her questions. Name? Trisha Lane. Previous trade? Paramedic. Current symptoms? Fever, nausea, hearing changes, sleep disruption, unusual dreams? Trisha looked up. Hearing changes? It's on the form, the woman said. Her smile never touched her eyes. Trisha took the welcome packet, cot number, work badge, and meal chit, then stepped aside and read the rules while people filed around her. Curfew at 9 p.m. Weapons restricted without wall duty authorization. No access to the old subway district. No access to the East Reservoir. No entry into utility corridors, service tunnels, or storm drains. Children indoors after dusk. Whistling prohibited in residential or maintenance zones. That last one held her attention. She looked back up. Whistling. The intake woman was already on to the next person. Noise discipline. Too fast, too rehearsed. Trisha folded the packet and slipped it into her pocket. Across the gym, a brass bell rang somewhere outside. No one flinched. No one even looked surprised. That too was wrong. For 2 days, Halcyon made a persuasive argument. Hot soup, bread, clean blankets, a cot indoors, antibiotics at the clinic, people whose eyes were tired but not empty, children reciting multiplication tables in the square, a market where batteries could still be traded for bar soap, socks, and thin peaches. In the evenings, the bell rang and the whole square gathered for announcements. Who was on wall rotation, which greenhouses needed labor, which sections were on power ration, who had given birth, who had died, life somehow continuing in list form, and the dead never came. Trisha watched the city the way she'd once watched trauma patients. Not for what they said, for what their bodies were hiding. By the second night, she noticed how softly everyone spoke. By the third, she realized no one in Halcyon ever hurried unless told to. And nobody whistled. Not once. She saw a little girl nearly do it while chasing a hoop in the square. Her father caught the beginning of the sound before it could form and hushed her so sharply the child looked ashamed. That night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the pipes in the gym started humming. Low, steady. Not like water moving, like tone. Like the walls themselves had found a note and were holding it. Trisha sat up on her cot. Around her, more than 60 people slept through it without stirring. Not a twitch, not a murmur. Beside the bleachers, a small boy rolled over in his sleep and whispered, "Don't go in the water." The hum stopped 4 minutes later. The silence afterward felt too large for the room. In the morning, Trisha found the boy sitting on the floor with a purple crayon in one hand and a sheet of paper balanced against his knee. He had a buzzed haircut, a sweater too big for him, and the solemn expression of a child who had aged in directions no one should. "What's your name?" Trisha asked. He kept drawing. "Eli." "Mind if I look?" He shrugged. The drawing showed a large circle with smaller circles inside it, and black lines dropping beneath all of them into a dark shaded mass. "The city?" Trisha asked. He nodded. "And those?" "The people." Trisha crouched. "And the dark part underneath?" Eli's crayon paused. "The thing under it." There it was again, plainly said. Like weather, like plumbing, like a fact everyone should understand. What thing? His eyes lifted to hers. The one that sings. A woman from the breakfast line appeared and placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on, Eli. He stood immediately. No argument, no delay. As he walked away, Trisha looked back at the drawing. The little circles inside the large one. The black lines beneath them. Not roots. Connections. She folded the page and tucked it into her pocket. By the fourth day, Trisha had found Jonah. Or maybe Jonah had found her. He was on wall maintenance, tightening a bracket on one of the floodlight housings when she joined the observation team with a medical satchel and the excuse of checking on a guard with infected bite paranoia. He was tall, spare, and looked like he'd been built out of leftover angles. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw in a pale seam. His maintenance jacket was permanently stained with grease and old rain. Trisha was at the parapet when she saw it. The infected wandered in the open lots and feeder roads beyond the city in scattered groups, no different from any other place, until they drifted too near. Then they stopped, every time, roughly the same distance from the wall. Heads tilted, bodies hanging still, listening. And then, after a long moment, they turned and walked away. Not because they were afraid, because they'd been told. First time? Jonah asked. Trisha glanced over. Seeing that? Yes. Most people find it comforting. You don't? He gave a small, dead smile. I did the first week. What changed? Jonah wiped his hands on a rag and looked across the empty ground beyond the wall. I started wondering what kind of thing a zombie listens to. That was the first honest sentence anyone in Halcyon had given her, so she gave one back. I think something in the city is making them stay away. Jonah's eyes shifted to hers. For a good second, something like relief moved through his face. Good, he said quietly, so I'm not the only one. Jonah had been in Halcyon 4 months. Long enough, he said, to learn the rules that weren't written down. First rule, don't ask why the dead keep their distance. Second rule, don't ask where the missing go. Third rule, never trust the water after dark. They met in fragments after that. A minute in the clinic hallway, a whispered exchange near the market stalls, a conversation disguised as an argument beside a generator house. Jonah worked utility maintenance. He knew the city from underneath. Pump systems, pressure lines, service ducts, electrical failures, places where the official map ended and the real city kept going. He had noticed things. Midnight truck movements into restricted sectors. Gym rosters that quietly lost names. Children drawing the same circles Eli had drawn. Water from the east reservoir tasting clean one day and metallic the next. And the hum, always the hum, at 2:13 a.m. every night. Synchronization pulse, Jonah said one evening as they stood near a stairwell pretending to compare inventory sheets. That's the official explanation? He nodded. You buy it? No. Then why 2:13? Jonah glanced toward the hallway, then lowered his voice. The old city grid used to shift load at that hour. Bell says it's the best time to run deep transfer without stressing the lines. Deep transfer of what? Jonah didn't answer. A beat later, he added, I know one thing about the whistling. Trisha looked up. In the early days, he said, a kid whistled near a service hatch in one of the apartment blocks. 3 people upstairs went into convulsions. 2 bit through their tongues. After that, the council banned it. Trisha stared at him. Why would whistling do that? Jonah's face had gone colorless in the low light. Because whatever is under the city sings on a narrow band, he said. And sometimes when the pitch lines up, he swallowed, it sings back. The next real answer came from the water. Trisha was crossing the eastern quarter after dusk when a hose slipped loose from a tank truck parked behind a fenced service gate. A thin spray hit the pavement. The nearest guard swore and moved to clamp it down, but not before the smell reached her. Metal, not rusty, not dirty, sharp and sterile, like a hospital sink after someone had scrubbed blood away and forgotten the scent still lived in the pipes. The truck was stamped with a tower symbol and stenciled in block letters. East Reservoir Access. One guard saw Trisha looking and stepped in front of the gate. Move. Trisha kept walking. That night she found Eli beneath the far bleachers again, knees to his chest, staring into the dark under the seats. Eli, she said quietly. The water. Tell me about the water. He didn't look up. It hears you better there. What hears you? The city. That's not a city. Now he looked at her. No fear, no confusion. Just the calm of a child repeating something he already knew adults wouldn't understand. It used to be, he said. Then he went still again. Trisha stood up. A city that used to be something else? A hum in the pipes? Whistling that made people seize? Water that carried trace exposure? Zombies that stopped at the perimeter like dogs at an invisible fence? By then, she no longer cared whether Halcyon was hiding a machine, a weapon, a disease, or a god. She only wanted the shape of the lie. On the sixth night, Jonah woke her after curfew. Not with words, with urgency. His hand closed around her forearm in the dark gym and guided her upright before she was fully awake. What happened? I found a gate, he whispered. Come on. They moved through the boiler room below the school, past sleeping generators and tool cabinets marked in faded paint. Down one stairwell, then another. The air grew wetter, colder. The hum inside the walls grew stronger until it was no longer something she heard, so much as something her bones had to carry. At the bottom, Jonah stopped in front of a chain-link gate standing half open. I didn't leave that like that, he said. Beyond it, the old subway service tunnel curved into darkness beneath the city. The rails had long since been removed. White arrows had been painted on the concrete floor, all pointing inward, toward the city center, not away, inward. Trisha swept her flashlight across the wall and found the stencil. Audio Response Chamber B, authorized personnel only. Jonah read it twice. Chamber B, which means there was a Chamber A, Trisha said. They went through. The tunnel sloped deeper. The walls changed. Hair-thin black lines traced through the concrete cracks like veins in stone. Speaker housings had been bolted overhead every 10 feet. Most were dead. A few still vibrated faintly with the same low, sustained note that passed through Halcyon every night at 2:13 a.m. Then came the smell. Sterile wetness, mineral damp, electric dust. Like a hospital lowered into a well. The tunnel opened all at once. Trisha stopped so hard Jonah nearly ran into her. Below them lay an underground chamber large enough to make the city above feel like a shell. A black sheet of water covered the old platform floor, and standing in it, row after row after row, were people. Hundreds of them, upright, still, eyes closed, heads bowed. Their skin looked almost translucent beneath the industrial lamps. Dark branching lines moved slowly under their flesh, tracing up necks, down arms, across temples. Cables descended into the water around them like reeds in a poisoned marsh. They weren't dead. That was the worst thing in the room. Not dead. And above them, at the center of it all, hung the thing Halcyon had built itself around. It had once been human. That truth remained only in fragments. Faces buried in mineral sheen, torsos fused into a load-bearing mass, limbs braided into impossible support structures, rib-like arcs of bone and calcified tissue spreading outward into a nest of cable, pipe, and scaffold. Its lower body disappeared into the water. Its upper shape bent forward as if listening to every heartbeat in the city above. The whole chamber breathed in time with it, hummed with it, obeyed it. On the opposite catwalk, lit by a hard strip of industrial light, stood Mayor Bell. 3 guards flanked him with rifles in hand. Bell didn't look surprised to see them, only tired, like a priest whose congregation had finally wandered into the sanctum before the sermon was ready. "That," he said calmly, "is why the dead never enter Halcyon." Jonah's voice came out thin. "What is it?" Bell looked down at the vast fused organism with the strange, solemn pride of a man introducing a monument. "At first," he said, "a survivor, then a specimen, then a project, then the only reason any of us are still alive." Trisha didn't take her eyes off the thing in the water. "It was a person?" "It still is," Bell said. As if in response, the central mass shifted once. Not awake, not asleep, merely aware. Bell continued. In the first months, research teams were studying infected behavior. Acoustic response, neural entrainment, territorial hierarchy. Most of the infected were simple: hunger and noise, motion and blood. But one, he looked down. One organized the others. One called, and they answered. The chamber's hum deepened. Trisha felt it in her teeth. "So you kept it?" she said. "We learned from it." Jonah took a step forward. "By doing what to those people?" Bell's expression never changed. "By integrating them." The word fell flat and cold. Trisha heard Eli's voice in her head. The thing under it. Bell gestured toward the water. "The process begins in the trace exposure through the reservoir, small enough not to alarm the body, enough to make it receptive. Auditory changes begin first, then sleep regulation, then emotional flattening, then alignment. Those who fully align descend." Trisha's throat closed. "The water?" "Yes, the hum at night." "A synchronization pulse," Bell said. 213 is the optimal transfer window. Lowest draw on the upper grid, least interference. "The whistle band?" That finally pulled a little sharpness into his face. "High narrow frequencies disrupt the choir. In early trials they caused seizures, panic, self-injury. We adapted. We prohibited them." Jonah stared at the chamber below. "The choir?" Bell spread one hand. "The signal is no longer carried by one source. It is reinforced by many. That is why the dead keep their distance. Halcyon is occupied ground, claimed ground. Even the infected understand hierarchy." Trisha's eyes dropped to the people standing in the water, to Curtis, to the nurse from intake, to a wall guard she passed the day before. All of them still, all of them linked. Bell's voice softened. In time, fully seated hosts can carry traces of the signal beyond the city. A relay effect. Sanctuary can travel. There it was, the most horrifying sentence in the world, spoken like a public works update. Jonah whispered, "This isn't Sanctuary." Bell looked at him with actual pity. "Outside," he said, "humanity is prey. In here, humanity becomes part of the chain above it. You call that horror because you still think survival means remaining unchanged." The lights flickered. The hum deepened. And then, all at once, every person standing in the water opened their eyes. No gasp, no convulsion. Just a shared rising awareness, as if one thought had moved through hundreds of heads at once. They looked up. At Trisha. At Jonah. At Belle. At the catwalks. Their mouths parted in unison. The chamber whispered in layered voices. "Stay." Jonah moved first. He hurled the wrench in his hand at Belle. The guards raised their rifles. Trisha yanked Jonah backward a fraction of a second before the first shot split the air. They tore back into the tunnel as the chamber behind them didn't scream. It sang. A single ancient note rolled through the concrete like something below the earth had remembered its own name. Above them, bells began ringing across the city. Not panicked, not chaotic. Measured, ceremonial. The sound of a place calling itself to attention. Red emergency lights stuttered on in the service corridor. Jonah took a wrong turn, swore, slammed through a maintenance door, found the runoff channel and ripped open a hatch over black ankle-deep water. Through here. They dropped into the storm drain and ran. The bells above them kept ringing. Footsteps moved overhead in disciplined patterns. No screaming, no confusion. Halcyon wasn't being attacked. Halcyon was responding. At the end of the drain tunnel, Jonah skidded to a stop so violently Trisha nearly collided with him. The grate ahead stood open, and framed in it, barefoot in moonlight, stood Eli. Water dripped from the hem of his sweater. His face was calm, too calm. "Eli," Trisha breathed. He lifted his head slowly. "You have to go," he said. "Come with us." He tilted his head in that small, curious way children do when they're trying to understand something simple. Only nothing about it felt childlike now. "I'm with it now," he said. Beyond him, across the empty lots and cracked feeder roads, shapes were gathering in the dark. The infected, dozens of them, maybe more. Not charging, watching, waiting. "For what?" Trisha whispered. Eli smiled. The expression belonged to something old. "For enough." The bells stopped. Silence fell so completely that Trisha could hear droplets hitting the runoff behind her. Then from deep inside Halcyon came a single note. Low, vast, claiming. Across the wasteland, every zombie turned toward the city at once, and knelt. Jonah made a sound Trisha would remember long after the rest had blurred. Not fear, recognition. The sound a human being makes when they realize the rules are older than they thought. Trisha lunged and caught Eli by the wrist. For half a second, he came toward her. Then something shifted under his skin. Dark branching lines unfurled beneath the flesh of his wrist like roots moving under thin ice. No pulse beat against her fingers, only vibration. Jonah shouted, "Trisha!" She let go. Not because she chose to, because the boy standing in front of her had already gone somewhere no road could reach. "Go," Eli said again. This time the word carried more than one voice. Trisha and Jonah ran into the night. They put 20 miles between themselves and Halcyon before dawn. An old visitor center in a state park became shelter. The windows were long broken, Rain maps curled from the walls. A stuffed hawk sagged behind dusty glass in an exhibit case. Jonah shoved a bench against the front doors and slid down the wall beside it. Trisha sat on the floor with her back against a dead vending machine and listened to her own breathing. At first, she thought the sound in her head was memory. Then she realized memory doesn't keep rhythm. The hum was still there. Faint, tiny, patient. Not in the room, inside her, under her thoughts, beneath her pulse. Jonah was watching her from across the dark. "You hear it," he said. She didn't answer. Her hand rose to the side of her neck. The skin there felt warmer than the rest of her body. Too warm. She remembered the intake form. Hearing changes. Sleep disruption. She remembered the metallic water. The impossible sleep of the people in the gym. Belle's voice on the catwalk. In time, fully seated hosts can carry traces of the signal beyond the city. Outside, something shuffled across the parking lot. Trisha went still. A lone zombie drifted past the broken visitor-centered windows, lifted its face toward the building, paused as if listening for a faraway song, then quickly turned and walked the other direction. Not distracted, not confused, yielding. Jonah saw it too. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The truth had already entered the room. Halcyon was not the last city without zombies. It was the first city the zombies no longer needed to enter. The city hadn't found a cure. It had found rank. A place in the chain above hunger. And now that rank was moving. Not fast. Not enough yet to command. Not enough yet to build another Halcyon tomorrow. But enough for the dead to notice. Enough for the roads around Trisha Lane to begin going strangely quiet. Enough for frightened people, exhausted people, starving people, desperate people, to see what followed her and mistake it for safety. By noon, they would have to move again. They couldn't stay anywhere for long, because someone would notice the empty parking lots, the untouched roads, the way the infected hesitated at the edge of whatever place she entered. And people do terrible things when they think they've found a miracle. They follow it. They protect it. They build walls around it. Somewhere behind them, Halcyon would be opening its gates to another convoy. Somewhere ahead, another settlement would be praying for any sign that survival still had a future. And somewhere beneath the city, in black water under concrete and steel, the thing that had taught the dead to kneel would keep singing through its human choir, waiting for the world to come closer. Not by force, not by siege, by invitation. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe to Midnight Delight for more dark tales waiting in the silence. And tonight, before you lock your doors, ask yourself one thing. If the dead were avoiding your street, would you really want to know why? Good night.